Welcome to the Alaska Weather Show. I'm meteorologist Peter Chan, coming to you from the National Weather Service on this Tuesday, June 6th, 2023. And for additional weather information on top of what is provided in this broadcast, you can go to weather.gov. That is the National Weather Service's online presence that brings you to a map of the continental U.S. with Alaska and Hawaii to the lower left. Point and click anywhere on this map. It'll bring you the most current forecast with any relevant watches, warnings, or advisories. Of note, this Tuesday afternoon, it's in the Northeast. We have air quality alerts for smoke from wildfires coming down in out of Canada. We also have red flag warnings for critical fire weather conditions eastern Pennsylvania, New Jersey, back in through areas of northern Michigan. And here in Alaska, we have our own red flag warnings in effect until 10 p.m. this Tuesday evening for areas of the central Alaska Range into the middle Tanana Valley. And it's possible red flag warnings could be reissued for the same areas for Wednesday afternoon and evening, so stay tuned to later forecasts. We've had a slow start to the fire season here in Alaska compared to last year in 2022, and we continue to monitor high river levels, and there's still some lowland flooding, especially along the major river system, so we're expecting river levels to just slowly recede here over the next week or two. It takes a lot of time for the tremendous volume of snowmelt water to work its way down these large river systems, and overall we're looking at temperatures to average below normal, with precipitation running a bit above normal through June. Doesn't mean it won't be warm in parts of the state, it just means overall cooler than normal temperatures. Some nicer weather though as we get up near Ambler and areas westward. Kanana there, mostly sunny, 70 degrees as of early afternoon. Delta Junction, which is under that red flag warning until 10 o'clock this Tuesday evening. Some hazy sunshine, temperature 72 in a few areas in through the Tanana Valley, maybe Yukon Flats over toward Eagle along the Alcan border could flirt with 80 degrees. And here is that red flag warning for portions of the Alaska Range in through the Tanana Valley until 10 p.m. We have warm temperatures, 70s, breezy conditions, and humidities down as low as 20 and 25%, creating those critical fire weather conditions. So please refrain from doing any sort of outdoor burning or any type of activity that could cause a spark, because it would take very little to get a fire going and then spread rapidly. Fire danger is very high in those areas along, especially north side of the Alaska Range and in the Tanana Valley. Also areas around the Copper River Basin, Yukon Flats, and even up along areas of the central and western North Slope. Though again, the fire season here has gotten off to a slow start. All of the rivers are pretty much open now. No threat of ice jam flooding. That's over with, but we're going to have some lowland flooding continue in areas where we have the high water and all that snowmelt water working its way down through the major river system. So exercise caution if you're going to be out recreating anywhere along the creeks and rivers where the water levels are high. We are entering noctilucent cloud season in the northern hemisphere. Already some reports coming in out of northern Europe. Here in Alaska, we have a limited viewing season. It's usually later July into early August, because at this time of year we just have simply too much daylight. It's the Earth's highest clouds. They form 50 miles above the surface and are caused in part by fine particles of water vapor in the high atmosphere, the result of meteorite dust, and also rocket vapor, the water vapor introduced by rockets helping to contribute to that. Looking at the satellite imagery, we have more precipitation cloud cover here out over the Gulf, extending back all out through the Aleutians and also even along the Chukchi Sea coastline there, lower cloud cover. And high pressure is going to sit up there in the Arctic Ocean. We're going to have a broad area of low pressure over the lower Bering Sea and through the Aleutian chain, and then occasionally piece of energies just rotate up out of the North Pacific into, say, the west side of the Gulf. And this is going to keep areas of precipitation going, especially along the eastern Kenai and the Kodiak Island and parts of the Alaska Peninsula. Interior, a thermal trough here. That's going to result in some scattered showers, though temperatures may get up into the 70s. A few spots even flirt with 80 degrees here through midweek. Could be an isolated thunderstorm pop-up as we go through Wednesday afternoon and again on Thursday, as that thermal trough will just lie there between the Alaska Range and the Yukon River. And further south, just a trough of low pressure out through the Gulf, back to along and just south of the Alaska Peninsula in through the Aleutians. Temperature-wise, readings relatively mild. Most places above freezing. A few spots could be near or just below freezing along the Arctic and northwest coast. Look at the 70s across the interior. A few spots flirting with 80. Again, possibly fire weather conditions redeveloping their central Alaska Range and along the Tanana Valley. Lows again Thursday morning will generally be 40s to some lower 50s, and then temperatures getting back up into the 70s across the central portion of the interior, eastward through the Tanana and upper Yukon valleys, maybe back up around 60 or so in through the Anchorage Bowl. But looking farther ahead here through mid-month, the temperature outlook by the Climate Prediction Center indicates overall statewide temperatures are expected to average below normal. Doesn't mean some areas couldn't see warm temperatures in the 70s or even near 80 at times. It just means averaged overall. We expect temperatures to remain below average, especially along and south of the Alaska Range, centered on Cook Inlet and Prince William Sound. So we're not looking for any major warm-ups yet here in southern parts of the state. And overall precipitation may average a little above normal, a little better chance here along the west side of the state, as we would anticipate, with low pressure generally sitting out here through the lower Bering and along the Aleutian chain. We're going to have a southerly flow and at times pulling moisture back up toward the west and along the western coast. Also, the interior at this time of year starts to see convection, scattered showers and some isolated storms at times, so that trend will continue as well as we go through mid-June.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Here is your aviation weather. If you have a flight planned this midweek, Wednesday or on Thursday, we're going to continue to have an area of low pressure along the lower portion of the Bering Sea and along the Aleutians. Meanwhile, other energy will rotate out of the North Pacific to just south and southeast of Kodiak Island. And so this is going to create a moisture flow across the Gulf, kind of a general trough or dissipating frontal systems. Further north, we have high pressure up over the Arctic Ocean, influencing the weather there along the Beaufort Sea coastline there of the Arctic coast. For the interior Wednesday morning, a small chance of an isolated thunder shower along the Alcan border near the 40-mile Gold Country. Widespread IFR conditions over the Gulf, west side especially as you get over toward the eastern Kenai entrance to Cook Inlet, Kodiak Island. Much of the Bering Sea, Aleutians on up through the Bering Strait and Chukchi Sea. Wednesday afternoon, scattered showers, widely scattered thunderstorms embedded within an area from the south side of the Brooks Range, middle upper Yukon Valley into the middle upper Tanana Valley. Possibility there of some rumbles of thunder. Widespread IFR over the Gulf, especially the west side, much of the Bering Sea once you get off of the southwest coast and then again up through areas of the Chukchi Sea. Thursday morning could be an isolated rumble of thunder toward the Yukon Flats and even further west there just east of Kotzebue. And then areas of the Gulf continue to see widespread IFR conditions, including Prince William Sound, Kodiak Island. We also see IFR conditions along the eastern Arctic coast, Katovik to Utqiagvik, and then areas out over the Bering Sea, including St. Paul up through St. Matthew and St. Lawrence. Thursday afternoon, still could see scattered showers through the middle upper Yukon Valley between the Alaska Range and the Brooks Range, with some isolated thunder there. And also areas not quite as widespread of IFR along northwestern Gulf and also along the east side of Kodiak Island and back out through much of the central Bering, as well as areas around St. Matthew and St. Paul. Anaktuvik Pass will see VFR conditions, but an isolated thunderstorm could pop up with the afternoon or evening heating. Same thing, Atigun Pass, VFR conditions, though an isolated shower, thunderstorm, some cumulus buildups possible there with the daytime heating in the afternoon and evening. Lake Clark and Merrill, generally MVFR conditions there. The west arm of the Alaska Range as we round up through there. Rainy Pass, MVFR. Windy Pass, Central Alaska Range, VFR. Further east, Isabel and Mentasta Passes should generally see VFR conditions across the eastern half of the Alaska Range. Across the Copper River Basin, some MVFR conditions early in the day at Tanita, otherwise giving way to VFR. Portage Pass should generally hold on to MVFR conditions during the day Wednesday. And Chilkoot and White will start there in the far northern panhandle with IFR early in the day giving way to VFR conditions. Freezing levels aloft are highest over the east central interior through the Alcan border on over into the Yukon Territory at and above 8,000 feet. That warmer air nudges westward toward the Seward Peninsula and lower Chukchi Sea. We have 8,000-foot freezing levels and better, central southern areas of the Panhandle, but a cooler area of freezing levels only around 2,000 feet aloft over the central western Aleutians, associated with this broad area of low pressure over the Aleutians and lower Bering Sea. Icing threats where there are scattered showers, isolated thunderstorms across the interior from the southwest through the middle upper Yukon Valley between the Brooks and Alaska Range. We could see some icing above 10,000 feet. Otherwise, areas of isolated moderate icing possible along the western Gulf in through areas of the southeast Bering Sea above 8,000 feet. And the jet stream level winds at 30,000 feet. We have south winds 65 to 70 knots there over the Gulf. Broad area of low pressure way up there at 30,000-foot circulation just north of the central Aleutians, 700 millibars. We have that low circulation back toward the central Aleutians. Out over the Gulf, winds generally a southerly flow, 30 to 45 knots, south-southeast flow over the southwest side of the state. And as we bring it down to 3,000 feet, we still have that low circulation near and just north of the central Aleutians over the lower Bering Sea, with a couple of other weaker low impulses to the southeast of Kodiak Island and then just south of the Gulf of Alaska. And turbulence, we expect moderate turbulence possible along areas of the northern Gulf Coast, east side of the Kenai, Prince William Sound, in through the entrance of Cook Inlet, especially the lower end of the Alaska Peninsula. Welcome back to a special edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Peter Chan, and I continue my conversation with Dr. Rick Spinrad, the administrator of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, commonly referred to as NOAA. Dr. Spinrad, welcome back to Alaska.
Thank you, Peter. It's a pleasure to be here.
What excites you most about leading NOAA?
That's an easy one, Peter. Saving the world. I mean, it sounds trite, right? But when you look at the NOAA mission, we talk about service, science, and stewardship. I like to think about our mission as being about lives, livelihoods, and lifestyles. So everything we do in the weather, in the ocean, in fisheries, in climate is really aimed at protecting people, helping build new economies, and basically making our lives better. What about that mission is not exciting? So I actually came out of retirement for this appointment because I was so excited about contributing to that incredible mission. And I really feel that if we do our job right, we will make the lives of every American better.
And can you share with our viewers, because they know the overarching NOAA term, but they don't know necessarily what agencies are involved with them. I think it would be helpful for them to understand it's beyond, say, just like the National Weather Service, which is what I am part of.
That's right, and that's a very typical kind of reaction. So I travel all over the country. Some parts of the country, people know us for the National Marine Fisheries Service, where we manage sustainably the commercially viable stocks of fisheries. As you might imagine, with 40,000 miles of coastline here in this state, fisheries is a big part of our business. The Weather Service you mentioned. We also operate the National Ocean Service, which provides all of your navigational charts. So every person who goes out on the water here in Alaska is relying on our products, not just to see the depth of the water, but also to get the predictions of waves and currents and winds offshore. And to do that, we have have a satellite and shipboard and aviation community. So we operate 16 satellites, 15 ships, and 9 aircraft. We have our own Air Force and our own Navy. And then on top of that, we have a uniformed service. We have 321 NOAA Corps officers that fly our planes, drive our ships. So it's a really broad remit. I like to think of our responsibility as being the key players for environmental intelligence for the American public and American industry and American communities.
Yeah, I was going to say, not only say people think of the Weather Service mainly as issuing forecasts and warnings, but again, NOAA as a whole, we are collecting scientific data that is essential for this country. How does that, how is that applied? Because people have to understand this goes to policy and other things for this nation.
Absolutely. So you think about how we make decisions about fishing, about agriculture, about energy, about transportation. Every decision associated with those sectors is based on understanding the environment, the weather, the climate, the ocean. And so we collect all the information, but then what do you do with it? You convert it to knowledge, and that's where all of our sophisticated models and prediction systems. So we run massive computational programs. We collect all the data. People around the country see our radars. They might see our balloon launches. They might see our airplanes. They know about our satellites, because when you turn the TV on at night and you see that image of the Gulf of Alaska, that came from a satellite, most likely, that we operate. So we bring all those data into very sophisticated models and say, okay, if this is what it looks like now, based on our understanding of physics and how the winds work and how the ocean works, what will it look like tomorrow, 5 days from now? And what do we think the general pattern will be in a few months? All of that requires a lot of very detailed scientific knowledge, but also collecting information. And I might add that what's become particularly important, and I think it's particularly relevant here in Alaska, is the application and co-development of products using traditional knowledge, of which there's a lot here in Alaska. So how can we work with local communities and say, hey, what do you understand about the way the ocean behaves when it looks like this? Can we build that information, that knowledge, into our forecast system? So it's really an exciting application of state-of-the-art technology as well as taking advantage of traditional technologies, if you will.
Well, ensuring service equity is another one of NOAA's strategic goals. Can you tell us what service equity means for people living in places like remote Alaska? One of the
challenges that I would say in the past was that we would provide products and services and basically just issue them to, in a broadcast manner, to a broad array of the population. And we've realized, whether it's in the coastal communities of Alaska, some of the inland communities, or for that matter, inner cities in the lower 48, that there are products that need to be developed specific to the needs of these communities. So we are engaging actively in a process of co-development, talking with communities. For example, over the last year, throughout the country, we've conducted 8 what we call climate and equity roundtables, where we sat down, and one of those was here in Alaska, with those communities, with native tribes, and said, what are your needs? What are your requirements? What are your capabilities? And I'm proud to share with you that as a result of that, we've begun a number of products. We'll be putting about $250,000 here in Alaska into working with the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium to try to determine what the priority products are that are needed by exactly the communities you're talking about.
And not only that, I'm sure there will be a move to expand telecommunications capabilities, the infrastructure that is needed to get this information to people, especially in rural locations.
One of the exciting things about being in the Department of Commerce is that also in the department is the National Telecommunications agency, the agency that's responsible for ensuring broadband connectivity throughout the country. And I know the head of NTIA was just here in the state last week, and so we rely on, whether it's FAA or NTIA, to ensure that we have the kind of communications connectivity, especially internet connectivity, to get these products out to communities no matter where they are. So I'm excited that many of the products that we're developing right now, which are difficult to deliver to remote communities will be much easier to deliver because of these new technological capabilities for communications.
Well, that certainly sounds very promising. And finally, you have a distinguished career spanning 4 decades in science and public service. Can you briefly describe the requirements and opportunities that lie ahead for Alaska high school and college students who may consider a career with NOAA?
Well, first of all, it always shocks me when somebody says I've got a career of over 4 decades. I'd still feel like a graduate student, but that's my enthusiasm for the position and the job that we do. And I would say, I think there's, when I was going to college and graduate school, we tended to focus on particular aspects of environmental science. I want to be a biologist, or I want to be a physical oceanographer, or a meteorologist. And what we're realizing now is it's an Earth system. That if you really want to understand what's going on, you probably need a good foundation of education in the spectrum of physical, biological, geological sciences. The other thing I would say is I think it's really important to understand data sciences, not so much as becoming an IT technician, for example, but understanding how large volumes of data will be used to answer difficult questions. So some familiarity with building models, understanding how data are collected is also an important component of the job. And the third thing I'd say is, and I'm a little biased in this regard, I was trained as a traditional kind of scientist, and my plan was to be an academic scientist. And then I realized it's so important to try to communicate what we're doing to impact policy, to help the public understand the value of the science that we do, that I think every scientist should learn a little bit about the applications of their science. Doesn't mean that they have to get into the applications or become a politician, but they should spend a little bit of time understanding why the science is relevant to the world writ large. So that would be my guidance to young students right now.
Well, Dr. Sprinrad, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you about the importance of these things happening with NOAA in Alaska, and I certainly thank you for your time and expertise. And those of you watching, thank you for joining us for this special edition of Alaska Weather Facts.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back, and now let's take a look at the sea ice edge. We are now in that period of early summer where the melting accelerates. We're seeing areas opening up now east of Kaktovik along the Canadian Arctic coastline. Areas of the lower Chukchi Sea through the Bering Strait, ice also melting off, with areas opening up especially south of Wainwright down through Point Hope and the Bering Strait. Also some ice remains on the east side of St. Lawrence Island in pockets there east of Nome, and then on the southeast corner of Norton Sound. But as we would expect now, this area is rapidly melting off and shrinking there out through the north central Bering Sea. For the inner channels of the Panhandle on Wednesday, winds will be northerly 10 knots, Petersburg down through Ketchikan, waves foot or two. Southeast winds, Lynn Canal, waves a couple of feet. The outer coast, 15 to 20 knots off of Craig and Sitka with waves 5 to 6 feet. Winds pick up to as high as 30 knots out of the east there west of Yakutat Bay, with waves running as high as 9 to 10 feet off of Cape Suckling. And then for Thursday, winds will be southeast to south, 10 knots, the inner channels with waves running a couple feet at best. Outer coast, 15 to 20 knot south winds, Craig to Sitka, and then southeast winds 15 to as high as 25 knots west of Yakutat Bay, with waves 6 to as high as 8 feet. Northwestern Gulf, northeast to east winds 30 knots, waves as high as 8-9 feet off the coast of the Kenai. And then as we go into Prince William Sound, winds will be easterly 20 knots, 4-foot waves. Look for north-northeast winds 20 to 25 knots down along the length of Cook Inlet, with waves running 4 to as high as 6 feet. For Thursday, easterly winds continue Prince William Sound, though 20 knots, waves a few feet. Easterly winds 25 knots off the Kenai Peninsula coast, and winds within Cook Inlet 15 to 20 knots from the northeast to east, and waves 4 to 6 feet. On Wednesday, northeast winds around Kodiak Island at 20 to 25 knots, waves running 6 feet or so either side, including Shelikof Strait. Generally easterly winds across the northern half of the peninsula, 15 to 20 knots, more variable, around 10 knots as you get southeast of Sandpoint and False Pass. Waves 5-6 feet on the North Pacific side, a few feet on the Bering side, and then across a broad area of the region on Thursday, we're expecting east to southeast winds around 15 knots, waves 3-4 feet on the North Pacific side, and running at 2-3 feet there on the Bering side. And for the Aleutian chain on Wednesday, generally south to southwest winds 15 to 20 knots, eastern and central Aleutians turning west to northwest 20 to 25 knots west of Adak, and waves generally running 7 to 9 feet on the North Pacific side and 4 to 5 feet on the Bering side. By Thursday, light variable winds around 10 knots throughout the eastern and central Aleutians, but west of Adak winds turn northwesterly 15 to 20 knots. And along the southwestern coast and out of Norton Sound, winds will be east-northeast 15 to as high as 20 knots out of Bristol and Kuskokwim Bays. Northeast wind 20 knots there, St. Matthew, with waves 6 to 8 feet also around the Pribilof Islands. For Thursday, winds still out of the generally northeast to east 10 to 15 knots, upwards to 20 knots in the vicinity of St. Matthew, and 15 knots there, St. Paul, with waves in the open water as high as 4 to 6 feet once you get well offshore. And then along the Arctic coast, winds will be east-northeast 10 to 15 knots, turning more northerly as you go down through the lower Chukchi Sea and the Bering Strait at around 15 knots. And for Thursday, winds pick up a little bit out of the northeast there along the Arctic coast, Utqiagvik to Kaktovik at 20 knots, accelerating upwards to 30 knots west there along the coastline from Wainwright down to Cape Lisburne and Point Hope. And then generally a north wind coming down through the Bering Strait around 20 knots to the north side of St. Lawrence Island, and a north wind around 10 knots within Norton Sound. So overall, the pattern is going to be such here through midweek, Wednesday and Thursday. Low pressure residing over the lower Bering Sea and around the Aleutians. Wavelets of energy coming up out of the North Pacific and rotating up into the Gulf. We have a weak thermal low across the central interior due to the warmer temperatures, which is typical for this time of year as we get into the summer season, with scattered showers and perhaps an isolated thunderstorm popping up there across areas of the central and east central interior both Wednesday and again on Thursday afternoons. But overall, cooler than normal temperatures are expected to prevail, especially south central areas along the Gulf Coast. No signs of any big warm-ups in these areas, with those scattered showers and isolated storms possible in the interior.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.